Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are going to go ahead and get started right now because we have plenty of folks who are coming in from that waiting room. I am so excited to see you here. My name is Brinton Botkin. I use she, her pronouns, and I lead student marketing efforts here at Handshake. I'm so excited because fall recruitment is in full swing, and we want to make sure to give folks access to tools to be successful in a wide variety of career paths. This fall, we're bringing in recruiters from different industries and disciplines to answer your questions. Today's panelist is the Director of Recruitment at Tutor, and he will share some tips and tricks for making a great impression with hiring professionals in today's job market. For the next 20 minutes or so, prepare for a structured conversation, but you can feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to get to as many as we can before we wrap today. As a reminder, you won't be able to see questions submitted by others until we mark them as answered live, so please don't think we're ignoring yours. We'll try to get to as many as we can. We tend to receive a lot of those questions during these events, so anything we don't get to today, we will use to inform future content and events like this. With that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so everybody can see your face. Darius, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself and give some background on you and what you're working on at Tutor today?
Definitely, definitely. Thank you all for hosting here at Handshake, and thank everybody for joining. My name is Darius Rose, and I'm the Director of Recruitment here at the Go Tutor Corps. I've been with the organization for just over 4.5 years. Former educator, I taught fourth grade in Harlem. Prior to that, I probably had about a 10-year career in college athletics, working in different athletic departments, different football programs, all the way from Division I all the way down to Division III. I would say the biggest thing for me is like I really do enjoy helping people. I enjoy being of service. I find the work to be super, super rewarding. And I'm really excited to kind of talk to you guys today. Brent, I think you're on mute.
You would think, years of doing this that I would learn. Anyway, thank you so much. Let's start with the first things first. I know that a lot of folks will also ask about specific protocols that are unique to each industry. Can you walk us through what recruitment looks like in the government nonprofit space? So what types of roles you recruit for, that kind of thing.
Great question, Brendan, and thank you for asking. I think that recruitment in government and nonprofit definitely has like a lot of unique aspects to it that kind of set it apart from other industries. I think at the core of it, the process and just kind of like the overall sector is very mission driven, which means that we're looking for people who are aligned with the values and the goals of the organization. And to speak specifically for the Go Tutor Corps, our is to close educational opportunity gaps. So our recruitment process really kind of focuses on not just the skills that a person might have, but the passion, the resilience, and the commitment to service. So it could look different, and I'm trying to be very broad here, but for us, targeted outreach, and this is something that I tell my recruiters, and this is something that I often tell like young people who are, getting ready to enter the workforce or looking for, an opportunity after college. You have to be able to like tell a story. You have to be able to tell your story. And sometimes it doesn't necessarily have to worry about like the technical skills up front, but like what are the things that you have done or what are the things that you are doing and how do they align with the organization and the organization's mission? And I will say the roles that we're hiring for right now, primarily we focus on recruiting AmeriCorps service members who will work with us and work with our partner schools and serve our students as tutors and mentors, particularly in under-resourced schools. These roles are really perfect for recent college graduates who are passionate about equity, education, and they really want to gain hands-on experience, whether it be tutoring, mentoring, or just community service in general. We do recruit for other like full-time roles that support the program operations and the recruitment efforts of the organization, such as program coordinators, engagement specialists. But the big thing that we really recruit for is the AmeriCorps tutor and mentor.
Love that. Thank you so much for that overview. And I'm sure that folks who are out there might be wondering about the different paths that come out of taking a service year. Can you speak to the opportunities that come out of the opportunities within the nonprofit space, as well as outside of it that job seekers could pursue following a fellowship?
Definitely, definitely. And again, it's just speaking from the lens of the Go Tutor Corps, our alumni go on to do, a bunch of different amazing things in a bunch of different sectors. Just thinking right now, 42% of our alumni are still involved in education in some way, shape, or form, whether it is as like a teacher or school support. 25% of our former fellows work for for-profit companies such as Hilton, Alpha Sites, Sony, ACT. And a good amount of our fellow alumni, after they finish a year of service, actually go on to earn their master's degree. I want to say about one in every three fellows that comes through our program decides to go back to school and continue their education. And speaking of that, there are some that are currently pursuing like law school. We have some that are pursuing master's degrees at NYU, Yale, and Harvard. And then we do have some that enter the workforce, like I said, paralegals, media managers, behavior techs. And then we do get a good amount of people who are working as teachers, whether it be in the United States or abroad in places like Spain or South Korea. And I think what lends itself to it being such a broad thing is there are actually like employers of national service. There are actually schools of national service that are looking for folks that have AmeriCorps experience. And they give them, priority interviewing slots. They give them a lot of different benefits and perks to that as well. And there's definitely a website that you guys can go to kind of check more of that stuff out too. But that's just kind of like it wrapped up in a nutshell.
I love it. Thank you. And I know we've shared some resources in the chat for everybody in the audience here today. So I'd love to dive into what recruiters like yourself are really looking for from candidates in terms of their profiles. So I'm talking about professional profiles like Handshake, LinkedIn, or any other professional platform. Do you have any green flags that you look out for, or like on the other side of that, any red flags that you want candidates to avoid?
Uh, Another great question, Brenton. I think the biggest green flag for me is having like a complete and up-to-date profile, making it clear, really kind of highlighting all the steps along your journey, and not really being, and I would say making it complete and clear as to like what it is you were doing. I think those are like probably like the biggest green flags for me. And in terms of red flags, especially for professional profiles, I would say, anything that kind of seems like unprofessional or anything like that. And I think, you know, the your headshot is always going to be important, right? You want to make sure that you're clearly showing your face. Sometimes and you'll probably get this too on resumes too, like your email, making sure you have like a professional email, not being too vague in like what you did or like how you describing what your experiences that you have along the way. And I know we said professional profiles, but in the profit spaces, particularly in education, you have to be prepared to, undergo a background check. And most of the time it includes a social media screening too, right? So being sure that like, hey, like you don't have any negative or inappropriate content on your social media feeds, or if like your profiles are private, highly recommended. But that's a story for another day. But I would just say, think of your online presence as like your first impression. Tailor your profiles to highlight what you bring to the table, especially experiences that demonstrate leadership, impact, and a commitment to service.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point is like your larger digital footprint is especially important in the education space and the nonprofit space. So really great call there. Okay, I'd love to get into the actual nitty-gritty of the application process. Do you have any advice for students who want to make a great first impression when it comes to their resume? Again, maybe any common mistakes you want to warn people away from, things that you've seen when it comes to resumes and applications.
I'm apologize to everybody on the call in advance if it sounds like I'm preaching to the choir or like saying things that you probably have already heard a million times, but I promise you, double, triple, quadruple check your resume for any spelling or grammar mistakes. I know it sounds silly, but I promise you, there are recruiters out there that will literally reject your resume just because of a silly mistake or a silly typo. Please, please, please make sure that you are checking that. Also, make sure it's formatted in a way that's easy to read and just kind of like naturally flows through your education, your experiences, your skills. But I also like to tell people, add your own flair to it. You know what I mean? Like if you have to make your name bigger and like put it in a different color, or if you are really good with like graphic design and you kind of want to make it a little bit more visually appealing, but still easily readable, I always tell people you want to definitely add some flair to it for sure. Mistakes to avoid. I kind of talked about this earlier. Silly or inappropriate email addresses. It doesn't take much to create a new email address. And then I usually tell people too, like keep it to a page unless you have like some serious relevant experience that would really make you stand out depending on the job that you're applying for. So yeah, like as much as I like to tell people to be good at storytelling in person, especially during interviews, like you have to be able to kind of tell that story on your resume as well.
Yes, absolutely. And I will say, like, respectfully, if you are early talent, you probably don't have any reason to go above a one-page resume. I will reiterate that. I've heard it a couple of times from recruiters during these fun info sessions. Awesome. Okay, thank you so much, Darius. I would love to get into, some skills work here. So, are there any skills that pertain to working in nonprofit spaces that you often see maybe overlooked or underestimated by job seekers when they're applying?
Um, Yes, and I think that it kind of goes in two different directions, right? I think that there are skills that are kind of overlooked, not only on the application, but also just like during the interview process as a whole, right? I think that job seekers, especially ones that have little to no professional experience, finding ways to verbalize your informal experiences and tell a story is crucial. You're gonna hear me tell a story is like throughout this whole thing. So don't really be ashamed. Don't be afraid to share things that you've done, experiences that you had that might not seem as like professional, like being like a waiter or a bartender or a camp counselor, or even working at a fast food restaurant. Those are experiences that you were exposed to, you learned from, and now you just have to think about how can you apply a service lens or a nonprofit lens to those experiences to kind of help you think about and dig through like what are the actual skills that you gain from that, right? And when I think about the question relationship building, adaptability, cultural competence, communication, and being able to interpret data, I think would probably be like the main skills that are often overlooked, not just in the application, but also just throughout the entire interview process for job seekers in the nonprofit space.
Thank you. I think that's great. And I'd love to talk about, let's picture you've made it past the application process, right? You're actually in seat or in virtual seat for an interview. What advice would you give for folks on the line when it comes to standing out to a recruiter during that first interview experience?
I usually tell people try not to think of your first interview as an interview. Think of it more as like a conversation. And I think that kind of gets the nerves settled and calm a little bit. And it really allows you to kind of shine and again, to tell your story, right? Be professional, but also be like authentically you. Like as you can see, like I'm wearing a sweater and like a vest. Like I'm not wearing a suit and tie or anything like that. But you do want to present as being professional, right? I always recommend doing a little homework, doing a little research on the organization and possibly the interviewer if you know the interviewer's name. Prepare some very thoughtful questions. I think recruiters really love when a candidate asks really great questions and not just kind of like the average, run-of-the-mill surface level questions. So prepare some thoughtful questions and again, add a little bit of flair of storytelling to your responses. A lot of times recruiters or interviewers will like ask you, I don't want to say like a softball question, but it's like they kind of lob it up for you to kind of like hit a home run. So really try to think about, what experience or, how can you answer that question that really tells a story that highlights a lot of the skills that they're looking for in the role. And another small thing, this is very, very small, but I do think it has a really, really big impact, is know the interviewer's name. And like from time to time throughout the interview, just say their name. It could just be as simple as, "Hey, Britton, that was a great question." Like I really, think about like that. And I think that helps add a personal touch. It helps build rapport a little bit more than people might think.
I think that's great. And I want to preempt a question that I'm sure we will get a follow-up to. Maybe I'll kick off the Q&A with it before we get into some of the other ones that have been submitted. But before we get into that Q&A, I want to do some rapid fire questions for you. Let's talk about cover letters. Yay or nay on cover letters?
Oh, my rule of thumb is nay unless it's required or the salary is over six figures.
I like that. I like that. If you want over a six-figure salary, you should be working extra hard for it. Love it. Okay. Thank you note after an interview. Yes or no?
I would say it depends. I would say yes if you feel like you genuinely made a connection with the interviewer.
Hmm.
And it could be, something as like you related to something that didn't even have to do with like the interview itself, right?
Hmm.
I think finding that connection and then being able to follow up is nice.
Love that. And then paper resumes, good idea or unnecessary? And I'll give some examples here, like bringing them to a career fair and then also bringing them to your interview if you're doing an in-person interview. Do you have any recommendations there?
Bringing them to a career fair, yes. Bring paper resumes to a career fair. Bringing paper resumes to a in-person interview, I think, is unnecessary.
Okay, save the trees. Love it. Okay, so let's get into that Q&A section. I'll remind folks if you have any questions for Darius, feel free to pop those in. We'll have about 10 minutes here. And Sarah, reading my mind, asked a question that I had the feeling somebody might ask based on your advice for standing out during that interview, which is what would you say as a run-of-the-mill interview question that interviewers get? And then what are some alternatives that like thoughtful questions to your point of like really well prepared, thoughtful questions that somebody might be able to ask back to the interviewer when they say, "Do you have any questions for me?" at the end.
So I will say one of the mill questions I would say is like, what is the culture like, right? And I think that is a great question, but I think it's very broad. So I would say, as a candidate, what really matters to you in a work environment, and then be a little bit more specific when you ask that question. So if it's around like, hey, like what are the PTO policies, or what happens if, I'm sick or like a team member's sick, like who covers that kind of work and things like that. Those are like really specific questions that, are kind of hinting at what the work culture is like at that organization, right? I would say another thing too is I feel like a lot of candidates ask, um, you know, why did like what's like the best part of like your job, or like what's the best part of that thing, right? And again, I think depending on the job that you're applying for, I think that's always great. But I would often ask like, what do you think is like the most challenging aspect of the role, right? Or what is the most challenging part of like working at the organization? And I think that also kind of hints at, again, the culture. I think that also kind of hints at some of the challenges that you potentially would be facing if you decide to, if you're offered the role and you accept. So those would be kind of be like some of the questions that I would ask, that are a little bit more, not necessarily run of the mill, but a little bit more detailed, a little bit more specific.
Yeah, they're a little meatier. They give the interviewer something to chew on and get into some real answers that'll show you more about what life will be like on this job. I think that's great. Okay, we have an anonymous attendee who is wondering how you feel about cold contacting people on platforms like LinkedIn or Handshake to ask for like informational interviews, or building relationships in kind of like a virtual networking capacity. Do you recommend that? Do you have any best practices for cold outreach from candidates or folks who are trying to kind of build their network?
I highly, highly recommend cold outreaching, cold calling, cold messaging. I'm not gonna lie to you, just like even working at the Go Tutor Core, I've found people that currently are employed here by doing that, right? And I think that one, it shows initiative, and I think two, depending on your messaging, I think that it's creating an in for you to learn more, to build that relationship, and hopefully leverage that relationship as you progress throughout the application and interview stage. So typically, what I would say is, if you guys have any mutual connections, especially on LinkedIn, LinkedIn does a really good job of like showing you like, hey, like you're connected to this person by the third degree, second degree, first degree, whatever. Leverage the mutual connections, right? And then also talk specific about what role it is that you're looking into and you're interested in. Highlight maybe one or two things about you or about some of your experiences that you feel like would translate very well. And then give them the option like, hey, I would love to speak to you, or if there's anybody else on your team that would be willing to kind of give me a little bit more information, that kind of leaves the window, because now it's not like a yes or no thing. It's like, oh, yes, I can talk to you, or oh, no, I'm probably not the person, but I know somebody who would be willing to talk to you.
Right, you're building a web of connections. I think that's really important. Awesome. Okay, we have a really fun question from Ella, and I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about it. And they ask, what does telling a story look like in an interview setting? Can you give an example of what like really good storytelling would look like as an interviewee?
Yeah, I can definitely give you a story, right? And I think that a lot of the times when you are looking at like a resume, you just see bullet points, right? And when an interviewer asks, so tell me about yourself, or like, what has led you to like apply for this role or something like that. Like I think about my core like value. Like what is the one thing, no matter where I've been, what I've done, that's kind of kept me going. For me, it's always been helping people, right? So I will talk about like, hey, like I'm the oldest child of four. I have two younger brothers, a younger sister. I've always wanted to be a role model for them. I've always wanted to be the person that kind of makes sure that they're in a better position than I am. And then as I progressed throughout my career, I was a teacher. I wanted to help students. I was the director of football operations. I wanted to help athletes get from, A to B, from the next step, right? That's always been a constant theme in every stop along my professional journey. And I think that is what I can bring to this organization or whatever the role is, right? Um, if I'm thinking service minded, or service or nonprofit, like that is the thing. Like you want to be able to tell a story. You want the recruiter or the interviewer to be able to visualize, your response and not just kind of like some cookie cutter, you know, I was a director of football operations and I was recruiting and, I was, doing compliance. Like, yes, great. I see all that on your resume. What else is there? You know what I mean? What can we do to get beyond the surface level of like, how can you connect the dots on your resume to the actual impact that you had while you were there? If that makes sense.
I think that's great. I love the story. Also, fellow eldest child to eldest child connection. Love it. Okay, we have a question about specifically Go Tutor Core from somebody. It sounds like maybe they've done a service year or two in the past.
Mhm.
If you have served in AmeriCorps for 2 years as a city year and artist year member, can you still apply for Go Tutor Core? And if this is not something you can answer on the spot, we can move past this, but would be interested to hear your answer.
This is something that I can answer on the spot. Yes. So I believe AmeriCorps right now currently has a limit of somebody cannot do more than 4 service terms. So it
Okay.
looks like you've only done 2 at City Year and Artist Year member. If that Artist Year is still like an AmeriCorps program, then it looks like you've only been able to do 3 terms. So technically you can still do a 4th term. However, the Siegel Education Award, which is like the scholarship or grant that you get, you can only get that award twice. So you can
Mm.
still apply, you can still do another term, but you would not be able to get the Siegel Education Award.
Helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. And we have a couple of questions of a similar flavor, which is like obviously you, Darius, are very invested in Go Tutor Core and you want people to apply to Go Tutor Core. But for somebody who might still kind of be exploring their options, maybe they're still in school, they're not ready to take on a service year yet. Do you have any recommended resources for kind of exploring entry-level nonprofit jobs as you're kind of thinking about your options after graduation?
100%. The AmeriCorps website itself has a huge directory of different service and nonprofit organizations that are in your community, in your state, in your city. A lot of colleges and universities actually have a department of, I want to say, civic service, where you can go and you can kind of talk to, whoever's running that department about any opportunities to be of service in your community, on your school community, or things like that. Volunteermatch.com is another website where you can kind of go on and look to see what opportunities there are. If you can't commit to a full year of service, I get it. It is a very daunting commitment. However, there are other opportunities to be involved and to give your time and make an impact.
I love that. Thank you so much. And kind of on a similar tone, we have an anonymous asker who's wondering if there are any specific positions that always seem to be in high demand in nonprofit spaces, in nonprofit organizations. Obviously, Go Tutor Core, you're very education focused, so I imagine that's a very in demand area. But would you expand there at all?
Yeah, I mean, education is always going to be a big one that, is going to be in demand. Like I can tell you right now, we're looking to recruit and hire somewhere between 260 to 300, tutors and mentors for the Go Fellowship program. I will say conservation is probably like another big one. And public health. I think that that is also like another big one as well. So I think those three sectors, education, public health, and conservation, those are always going to be, kind of like nonprofit, like sectors that are always going to be like in demand and like looking for people.
Super helpful. Thank you. Okay, I think we have time for one more question here. So I'm going to ask one from Catherine, which is wondering about what to do like with a quite specific major. So if you're graduating with, for example, it sounds like Catherine's graduating with an information systems major. Are there opportunities at somewhere like Go Tutor Core or in the AmeriCorps space that would be relevant for somebody with a specific major like that?
100%. I think now, probably more than ever, nonprofits are looking for people who can, collect data, interpret data, and use data to inform decisions. I don't necessarily know if that major specifically is related to like data in that way. However, there is that aspect of it, right? I think a lot of the times when people think of service, they think of like the on the ground, hands on kind of experience that you're doing. But even at the Go Tutor Core, like we have somebody who is like the director of research and data and does a lot of surveying and does a lot of programming with like schools to check on their attendance data, to check on their suspension data, to check on their academic data. And they're able to use that data to determine like, hey, like our students actually learning more when they're paired with a fellow in comparison to when they're not paired with a fellow? Are students' attendance higher when they're paired with a fellow versus students that aren't paired with a fellow? So there are roles. You might have to do a little bit more digging and a little bit more diligent like research, but there are roles specifically for folks that have like more specific majors. And even if you do, there are also other things that you can do to kind of like broaden, what you currently have to make yourself more attractive. If that hopefully that answers the question.
I think you answered it beautifully. Thank you so much, Darius, and right on time. I know we didn't get to every single question that was asked. For everybody who did not have your questions answered, we'll be sure to share these questions with Darius and the Go Tutor Core team. Wow, that was a tongue twister for me. But in the meantime, I would love to thank you so much, Darius, for your insights here today, for your energy. To everybody who tuned in, thank you so much for your attention. The time really flew by, so really appreciate you all. We're excited to bring you more events like this one in 2025. So please be sure to take 30 seconds to fill out our feedback survey so that we know what you'd like to see, topics you'd like to hear about, speakers you'd like to hear from, and we will use that to inform our approach for events in the future. And with that, thank you so much, Darius, and I hope you have a fabulous week, everybody.
Thank you, Britt, and thank you everybody for joining.
Thank you. Bye-bye.